Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
You can probably guess what our topic for today is because it's sort of the dominant topic of the episode, which relates to premarital sex and the status of a woman who is not yet married going to mikveh. And this came up. I'll just introduce what I put into the chat. So one, the Sefaria sheet was the sheet that I was teaching about a little bit earlier, which is sort of an abridged version of a sheet from my Rosh Yeshiva, rabbinical school, who does a podcast, Joy of Text, which I know Rabbi Schatz listens to. I don't know if anyone else listens to, but other people do, but I don't know if anyone cares.
That's me. I'm the only listener.
Relates, talks about a lot of different, areas of sort of the intersection of sexuality and halacha. And one of the podcasts was specifically about mikveh for women who aren't married. And so that obviously comes up in this episode. And like I said, I put the sheets there in the chat so you can see if you want to just kind of scan them. We're not going to be looking at them inside right now. Basically, as came up in the conversation with Avri and Hodaya, right? He said, he's like, by the way, like, where does that prohibition against premarital sex come from? It's in the Torah. And she's like, well, no, not really. It's really from the sages, and so forth. And he basically ends up saying, oh, so it's really all just an attempt of the rabbis to stop women from having premarital sex, and it's sort of like, yeah, kind of, right? Which is not untrue. It's a debate within the earlier sources. Like the Rambam says there is a biblical prohibition against a woman who's not married having sex, basically sex outside of a marital construct, according to Maimonides, is prohibited. Others disagree and say, no, prostitution is prohibited. There's a verse that says, "Lo tiyeh kadeshami b'not Yisrael." You shouldn't have an Israelite woman become like a prostitute. And there's another verse in the book of Leviticus about sort of prostituting out your daughters, but they say that's prostitution. There's actually a different construct which we see exist in the Torah, which is that of a pilegesh, often translated as a handmaid or a maidservant more often, I think. And a pilegesh is sort of a woman who is not married to a man, but there's sort of a formalized relationship between them, but outside the context of halachic marriage, which is chuppah and kiddushin, the two stages of marriage. And anyway, so there's this whole kind of back and forth within the sources about, is this really prohibited? Is it kind of prohibited? Is it not prohibited? In North Africa and, in Yemen and those areas in the Middle East, it was actually very common for men to have pilagshim, to have maidservants. Through the Middle Ages, that was a common enterprise. And so what we end up with is the Rivash, who's a rabbi living in the 14th century, who kind of introduces an idea which had never been discussed before that point, which is, look, obviously unmarried women are forbidden, it's forbidden to have sex with an unmarried women because all of them are in a state of nida, right? Until they've gone to mikveh, from the time they first, become mature, go through puberty, go through puberty until the time they go to mikveh, they're in a state of nida because they've never gone to mikveh before. And so it's forbidden halachically, by Jewish law, it's forbidden to have sex. Yeah, thank you, Rabbi Schatz. It's forbidden halachically to have sex with a woman who's in a state of nida. And he says, look, all women who haven't gone to mikveh are in a state of nida. So there we go. Easy answer to the question. And beyond that, he says, actually, so what we'll say is it's prohibited for women who are not married to go to mikveh, because if they go to mikveh, then people are going to say, so Norm asked about Judah having sex with a woman he thought to be single. So Rambam talks about sort of the difference as time develops. He says, back in the day, people had prostitutes and that was fine until the Torah was given. Once the Torah, Maimonides says this explicitly. He says, before then, men would go to the marketplace, they'd see a woman, he offered to pay her price, whatever her wages, whatever she demanded, and he said fine. Then they had sex, and that was fine until the Torah was given, and the Torah says no. So anyway, the Rivash brings in this idea and says not only is it you can't have sex with a woman who is in a state of nida, you are an unmarried woman can't go to mikveh because that would serve as a stumbling block, because if she went to mikveh, then she would realize that there's not really a prohibition against her having sex, or at least not at a biblical level. And that we sort of see in this episode, and we see Hodaya going to mikveh, and you can tell the mikveh attendant is sort of very confused, because it's like,
not confused enough. She should be more confused.
Fine. And she's like, what's your custom? And Hodaya has no idea. And it's sort of like, yeah.
There's so many times. Like, it was a whole, she was handing it to her and the woman did not take it.
Anyway. And so it's actually a conversation to this day about whether mikvaot need to / should ask women or demand women prove that they're married before going to mikvah. And in some places that is the case, that, they say, unmarried women cannot come to mikvah, and you have to show, you need, I don't know how they actually, like, what you have to do to prove it. But somehow you need to, like, in some way demonstrate that you're married before they let you go to the mikvah. Fine. This is, like I said, still a conversation today, because there are plenty of women who are in long, say, living with, a significant other, not married, perhaps becoming more religious, and ask rabbis this question, saying, I live with my boyfriend, we're having sex, I'm trying to become more religious, should I go to mikveh? Questions along those lines. And we sort of see a difference between what's said in public and in private. So you don't see publicly declarations allowing women, single or unmarried women, to go to mikveh, but privately, rabbis do give psak, do tell women, look, if no longer having sex is not on the table, it's better for you to go to mikveh, and hopefully one day, you'll either get married or you'll do more tshuva and sort of change your ways more formally, and so forth. But this statement of the Rivash of sort of transforming the conversation from being one about premarital sex generally to one about nida specifically is one that is very much has stayed this day, and this conversation about whether unmarried women are even allowed to be mikvah, or whether we sort of say you have to stay in a state of nida until you get married, and then going to mikvah right before your wedding is sort of exiting that stage for the first time in your adult life, right? That's still an ongoing conversation to this day. Okay. Rabbi Schatz wanted me to introduce what we're talking about today. So that's all by way of introduction. Rabbi Schatz, I'll hand it over to you if you have things you would like to add.
No, nothing. You can continue.
Okay.
No, I have a lot to add. Okay, so when I watched this episode last night, I figured that mikvah would be something that we would need to talk about. But I actually expected that the whole idea of being nida since the time that you got your period to the time that you get married was not a real thing. I had never heard of that before. When I associate nida with living, I associate it with partnership. I have never thought of nida as something that a woman can be in alone and without any kind of repercussion on another person, especially of the opposite gender, because that's not how the practice of nida is often conveyed. You don't usually talk about nida separate and apart from taharat hamishpacha. You usually talk about it as a way of understanding the kind of the kedusha, the holiness around a partnership and what those boundaries are in creating that holiness. And so I had never thought about it as a single woman could be considered nida. And I got very angry and started looking up if this happened to be correct. Rabbi Pernick told me it was correct, but I didn't believe him, and I went on my own kind of wild goose chase. He's right, unfortunately, and it is a principle that is with you from the time of your first period until the first time that you go to mikveh. So, for example, I will just use myself, right? As a person who's never been married and never been to a mikveh, I guess I've been in nida for a lot of years, which I will say part of my frustration, I think, is around, and this is a conversation for a different time, around the fact that when we talk about nida, we talk about it in a negative way. We talk about it as a sense of impurity, which I try not to do. I try not to talk about it as pure and impure, but being told that I've been in a state that often is defined as not as positive it's not a great feeling. I mean, it doesn't affect me in any way. I'm not any different today than I was yesterday, but it's not a great feeling to have that told to you. And I would assume that is something that for women who do know that, that they walk around kind of feeling that way and feeling that hesitation and frustration. So part of this rabbit hole that I went down, specifically knowing that I was coming to this conversation with someone from a different denomination, I tried to focus in my own. And part of what you will see in the more liberal movements is this desire to make mikvaot, to make a holy, vessel of water, be something that is allowed to people, whether married or not. The LA mikveh, the Los Angeles mikveh, right down the street, well, not right down the street, but around my area, does not allow unmarried women to go to the mikveh. There's a very large sign on the door that makes it clear that you should not go as an unmarried woman. My guess is that people similar to Hodaya in the show, that people do go, but that it is seen as kind of a violation of their rules. Same with the AJU mikveh, the mikveh that we use mostly for conversions, is also not a place that women are going for purposes of things that you might go for as a married woman. So that's number one. Sorry,
can you clarify that last point you made? You're saying the AJU mikveh, people do go there outside of only like the traditional marital.
Yeah, I mean, AJU's mikveh mostly sees converts and brides and doesn't see as many Taharat HaMishpacha people, candidates, women. I don't know what word to use after that. But I was going to say patients, so that's not the right word. But the AJU doesn't actually see that many women for those reasons anyway, just based on hours, and it's on the campus of a college, and so it's just a different experience. But they too, as far as I can understand from the website, they too are not kind of bringing in women who are unmarried to their mikveh. Now, I will say, in speaking a lot right now, one of the things that I've never been to a mikveh, and I don't know if like inherent in just my upbringing, I knew not to go to the mikveh until I got married, or if that was something that was once told to me. I don't actually know, but I've never been to a mikveh for any reason. And I do wonder if that's something that just you grow up understanding, that you don't go unless you're converting and then you go for the first time at your wedding. I had a lot of friends go before their ordination, but I did not. I felt uncomfortable going. So the other piece of this is this again, in the liberal world, though in this podcast that Rabbi Pernick referenced.
And I just shared again in the chat, by the way.
Great. Rob Linzer does, it's important for you to interject your voice every few minutes, because if not, I'm just going to talk for the next 40. He does talk about how this is coming up in all denominations, just a little bit more loudly in liberal denominations than in like the modern Orthodox to the Orthodox world. So what I'm about to say, I'm going to speak for the liberal movements, but it is clear that also in modern Orthodoxy, for sure, which is where he's speaking from, this is coming up as well, that there is something to be said for women who are practicing. He divides it between intercourse and sexual activities is what he calls it. So intercourse versus other kinds of sexual touch and intimacy, he's separating those two. And what he says is that if you are engaged in intercourse, you should go to the mikveh as an unmarried woman. Why? Because you are recognizing that you are taking something on that according to Jewish law, you should not be taking on, but at least you're going that extra step of not being in nida when you are having intercourse. Interestingly, and again, you can listen to this all on the podcast, interestingly, he says the opposite for if you are not having intercourse, but you still have some kind of sexual intimate relationship, right? So there are certain gradations of relationship that you might be in where a couple might decide that they're not going to have sex until, I'll use these words, intercourse until marriage, but other sexual activities they can partake in before marriage for whatever reason. That is a thing that people decide in the 21st century, and I'm sure the 20th and the 19th century. But what he says for that is because there are societal norms and categories around a woman going to mikveh, that if a woman were to go to mikveh as an unmarried woman, not for sex, not for intercourse, I'll continue to try to use the word intercourse, not for intercourse, but for these other types of sexual activities, that actually could put a stigma on her that is not warranted, that people might think that she is having sex with her boyfriend, fiance, what have you. And so he actually suggests that in that category, they don't go to mikveh, and that they just recognize that what they are doing is kind of outside of the realm of what Jewish law would suggest. My last piece on my soapbox that is growing taller and taller as I talk about this topic is that I find nida and taharat hamishpacha, which goes beyond just nida, to be extremely important. And it's something that as a conservative rabbi, I didn't learn enough of and am constantly trying to learn more about, just part of why this was frustrating as a side note, constantly trying to learn more about, because I find it to be something that unfortunately the liberal movements have pushed aside, but that I believe, especially in a world where we are trying to get, and I'm just going to speak for women right now, girls to be more aware of not only their bodies, but also their sexual knowledge, right? Both of their own bodies, but just of what is happening in general. That those boundaries give very healthy boundaries. But if you only practice them when you are married, right? And before you're married, you're going around assuming that you can be sexually active without having to take on those boundaries of going to mikveh, waiting a certain number of days after a period, those kinds of things, then you're kind of free to do whatever before you're married. And then all of a sudden there are these stringencies. What I would love to see, and what a few rabbis who I read talk about as well, Rabbi Chaviva Ner David, I'm going to put this in the chat so you can see it, is a woman who created the first, sorry, I can't speak and do the same time. The first mikveh in Israel that allows for anybody to come at any point. There's a lot of challenge around that, right? Women are allowed to come at certain times of their cycle, which would, for others, make it not a viable space for a mikveh. But what she points to, and what I would love to to see happen is these boundaries of sexual relationship that are, in my mind, positive, be put into place at a time in which women are at first becoming sexually active, if that is happening before marriage, as opposed to waiting till marriage to say, okay, here are all these boundaries, learn them, and hope you had fun while you were, unmarried. I think that would give a better sense of the holiness to a relationship and to the boundaries that are inherent and important in being in partnership. If I had a mic, I would say mic drop. I don't have one. So back to you, Rabbi Pernick.
Okay. And I'll encourage, other people, if you want to chime in with questions. I'll just start by sort of responding a little bit by way of some of the questions that are in the chat. So Norm was asking about if need is a principal reason why people are shomer negia. And you're right in making that connection. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about shomer negia and sort of what's forbidden, how far does that extend? That was just a couple of weeks ago. But you're a man shouldn't be physically touching a woman who's in a state of nida. And so it works very, very well to basically say, right, essentially women who are not yet married are just sort of, as Rabbi Schatz was saying, sort of desexualized almost, and sort of like they're just sort of off limits. They're in a state of nida or assumed to be in a state of nida. So, you don't touch them. Even, right, we talked about how shomer negia doesn't necessarily mean something like a handshake. A holding hands, yes. Shaking hands, maybe not. But if there's an assumption that, this woman's unmarried, she's hasn't been to mikveh, okay, well now she's in the state of nida, so you shouldn't be touching her at all, right? So it does sort of serve that similar kind of barrier purpose that the whole idea of saying, unmarried women can't go to mikveh serves when it comes to sex of, lest you say, I can sort of come close to the line, you say that this line is, a problem, and beyond that it isn't, so maybe I can shake hands and maybe keep holding the hand a little bit longer, things like that, to say, it's just better to say she's in a state of nida, don't touch it all.
But actually, I disagree with that.
Okay.
Wholeheartedly. Because I think that, again, what not you, Josh, but what that system then puts into place is nida is something negative. And I think that that's part of what needs to change, because being in a state of nida is not negative. It is a type of separation. And so if a man, okay, all worked up. If a man thinks of any unmarried woman as being untouchable because of the boundaries that one should have around what sexual touch is and who to have that with, that's one thing. But if a man goes around thinking, I can't touch that woman because she's had basically her period for the past 13 years, like that to me as a woman is where this stigma needs to shift, because it's that then ends up sounding dirty or impure, which is not, this is why I'm saying this is not you. I'm not speaking to you, Josh, but that is the generality of nida in the world. And I think by saying that, it plays into it a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Friedman's, I see, have a hand up. So.
Yeah, I went to the AJU mikveh. I think it was probably UJ at the time, before we got married.
Yeah.
And I went for myself. My motivation was, doing, I mean, for us, but really doing it for me. I think similar to Hodaya in the show, doing it for herself. It was symbolic for her. But it strikes me as perhaps for women who then would continue going on an ongoing basis, are they doing it more for the man so that he's not going to engage with somebody who's nida, or is it also for the woman's benefit too?
Do you want to answer that halachically, or do you want me to answer it?
Why don't you take the first shot, and then I'll
okay.
pipe in with that.
I would want to think that it's for the woman. I think that it's not. When it's outside of marriage, right? When it's for marriage, I want to believe that it's for both of them. In fact, I know many couples, specifically conservative rabbi couples, for whom not only does she go to the mikveh, but he does as well, when, like, as a married couple, to kind of show that this isn't just about you, this is about me, and us coming back together as a couple. I'm not sure that I in my own life would need to go that far, but I see the beauty in that. I think that in Hodaya's case, you're bringing up something that she ends up showing and feeling, in that she clearly did do it for herself, and that's why she also couldn't go through with sleeping with him, because she recognized that what she had done was not just to allow him to not, be viable for karet because he had slept with someone in Nida, but that she was doing it for her and kind of came back to her from self when she realized that if it was for her, then she also shouldn't be engaging in the activity at all. So that's my sense. But I wonder if Rabbi Pernick has a thought, or Rabbi Dinan has a thought.
So Rebecca, you're saying specifically in a non-marital,
No, I mean in a marital situation where the woman goes every month.
Yeah.
Is she doing it really for the man, for his benefit, or for herself? Is it?
So I would agree with Rabbi Schatz there that I think it really is sort of for the couple, right? It's such an ongoing process, right? It's sort of, you're constantly aware and in communication, because it's not just you go to mikveh and then you don't think about it for another month. There's a whole process of 5 days and then 7 days, and then you go to mikveh, and that, right? So, and then you're aware of how many days typically you have that you're in a state of tahara before you go to mikveh again. And then you have your period, and then that 5-7 process starts over again. So it's sort of I would say is very much for the couple, in that there's that sort of mutual awareness of, again, it's not just like the time of the month in the way that people often will talk about, like, oh, it's that time of the month. Like, sort of the whole month takes on its own character, because it's very, right, it's not just one day or 3 days. It's like an ongoing awareness of where in the month we are, and sort of, when you can sleep in the same bed and when you can't sleep in the same bed, right? And so there's like all these pieces that go into it that I think it really, hopefully, in sort of in the beautiful version of Nida, which is not always the way that it's, that it's done, it sort of allows for the couple to be really in touch with one another, and sort of in touch with this, it's like in this process of,
no pun intended.
I was trying to not use words that would be punny, but yeah, no, I think it's right. It sort of works for both of them. And obviously, it's, I think, harder on the woman, and the woman sort of feels like, it's a struggle, as Rabbi Schatz touches on, to not make it feel like, the woman's at fault, as it were, for being in Nida, right? Because it could feel that way, like, oh no, we were able to sleep in the same bed, and now because of what my body's doing, we can't, and we have to wait 12 days. Right, so the struggle, as Rabbi Schatz touches on, is that it's something related intimately to the woman's body, but that has ramifications for the couple as a couple, for both of them. So that's the part that's really hard to navigate, how you really experience it as a couple's dynamic when only one person is physically experiencing this.
And from couples that I know who practice tahara mishpacha, I think it's really about communication. And I'm not married, so I'm not speaking from my own experience, but I think that when there is, so Rabbi Dinan just wrote in the, I think you meant from, but in the from world, tahara mishpacha is portrayed as a beautiful and renewing experience, right? It often ignores the stress it puts on a woman, and that these couples often spend 2+ weeks out of every month not being able to touch. Oh yeah, and then you corrected from, good. I think even if you want to call conservative frum, then, more power to you. But also in my world, the way in which a couple talks about it and approaches it, I think, again, from the couples that I know, they find those days in which they're not having any kind of intimacy, right, of any kind, not just no actual intercourse, but no touching, no sleeping in the same bed, those kinds of things. Without that, there is much more space and much more need for communication. And especially in the world in which we live in today, sometimes that communication goes away because of the rush of our lives or whatever, and having time to lay in bed and not be able to do anything but talk to those people who I've spoken to have said that it really brings extra closeness and a positivity to the relationship that could be glossed over if there's never a pause from kind of physical communication, and this leads us to verbal communication. So this is one of the things that in the conservative movement we don't talk enough about, and I'm hoping to change that because I think it's really important, and I think that it doesn't have anything to do with how frum you are. I think it has to do with partnership and healthy relationships. And okay, I'm getting back on a soapbox. Anyone else have any other thing?
Yeah, I just want to chime in with one quick thing, and then in talking about that idea of sort of the partnership piece of that. I think it's a struggle that every couple has when it comes to childbirth, right? And that it's sort of a partnered process, but only one party is physically experiencing this, right? And the husband says, "Oh, we gave birth," and it's like, "You didn't give birth. Come on," So like there's that kind of similar dynamic about something where it's intended to be a partnership, but the woman is experiencing it physically in a very different way than her husband. And so I think, I hadn't thought about this connection before, but in some ways the nida process is almost like a preparation about the couple needing to communicate about things that are intimately part of the woman's body and not her husband, which is very similar to when they're having a baby for any couple, or any whatever heterosexual couple having childbirth. So it's not something that's sort of totally exclusive here. I think it does have connections to other part of life as a couple.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Other thoughts, comments?
There's so much with this whole thing.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to take notes.
Great. Well, it looks like Rebecca has another question, so we'll go back to the Friedman house.
Leonard.
Oh, Leonard has a question.
Me this time. I also went to the mikveh before we got married, but my question is, you were talking about the prohibition about having, in some circles, of having sex before marriage. What about sex after marriage? If a woman is divorced or is a widow, what's the story there? Is it the same as premarital?
In terms of like with her next partner?
In other words, if you follow the rule that you shouldn't have sex before marriage, does that basically mean you shouldn't have sex outside of marriage, whether it's before or after?
Meaning, does a divorced woman still go to mikveh?
Okay.
Right. That's like one ramification, right? Should a divorced woman go to mikveh if she's, she says, I want to remain sexually active. I'm divorced. Often divorced women still cover their hair. So
would a mikveh allow her to come if they don't allow people before marriage to come?
I don't actually know the answer to that question.
It's a great question. Yeah, I don't know either. I think often we saw this a little in the episode, in a couple of episodes ago about Amir's ex-wife. That she was continuing to cover her head, but then she stopped covering her hair because for dating purposes it was harder. So that's something in which a divorced woman or a married man, we talk about tallis also. A divorced man usually will continue wearing tallis, even if in an Ashkenazi circle, a single not yet married man won't wear tallis. So that's a really interesting question about whether I mean, I can imagine a divorced woman saying, no, I'm not going to mikveh because I'm not having sex until I get married again. Right? Like that's an easy answer. But the question about if a divorced woman says, you know what, okay, I got married, I'm planning on being sexually active, will she have an easier time getting a mikveh to accept her? And I don't necessarily think so, but I'm not sure, like on the ground with that, if there would be a difference there.
Rabbi Dinan says it's the same case as a single woman.
Okay, they treat it as the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
I knew he'd know. It was that Ramah education that got him all these answers. Norm, do you have a question?
3, actually.
Yeah.
One is, does a natural body of water such as the ocean qualify as a mikveh? I learned that it does 4 years ago, but I don't know. Yes?
Yeah. So Rav Linzer actually talks about this in the podcast also. I hope he's listening to hear how much I quote him.
You can send him the recording after.
He's not listening, so I hope he is, but he's not. But he actually talks about this, that if, in the same categories that I shared before of if a woman is living and having intercourse with the man that she's either dating or engaged to or whatever, that if she doesn't want to have to go through the process of discussing that with the mikveh guide or with a rabbi who would get her into a mikveh, that she can just go to a natural body of water. And as long as there's someone there to witness that she's submerged herself, completely, that would be one way of getting around having to go to an actual mikveh.
And if I remember correctly, the significant other can serve as a mikveh guide in that concept, right? Like,
whoa, really?
Yeah. Rabbi did it, I don't know, but I because, in all the cases that come up about, we're going on vacation to the Bahamas and we've been having trouble getting pregnant and, the timing is such that I really, need to go to mikveh, but we're going to be in the Bahamas and so forth. Because you might have noticed the involvement of the mikveh guide. There's someone who's who's checking to see, are your nails cut? Is your hair washed? Do you have contact, right? Nail polish, all that kind of stuff that goes on. But that could be anybody who's knowledgeable. Rabbi Dinan says not guy, at least to me. I recall in a context in which there's no, right, typically that's what we do, but I recall in a context in which, it's sort of the two of you are on vacation, there's no mikveh, there's an ocean.
I mean, if the two of them are on vacation in the Bahamas, like, let's just assume that, that sure, he can be a mikveh guy. Like, I think I can't imagine that it would be okay, because that would be a whole category of seeing a person who, assumedly, he hasn't yet seen.
No. Someone who he has seen. Someone he has seen.
Okay.
I'm saying not the first time they're having sex, but like for a husband and wife, for example, that he could serve as a mikveh guide if there's no one else around.
Okay.
Isn't it also the case that having intercourse is one of the ways in which one can get married?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I saw that question from before. So yeah, the rabbis try to downplay it, right? There's 3 ways you can get married, through kesef, shtar, and bia. Kesef is what we do, money, but we do rings.
We do all 3.
Well, yes, but really kesef is what we do. Kesef is an item of monetary value, which is the ring in most cases. Theoretically, you could say, we're going to have sex and you need 2 witnesses is the challenge, right? But if you had 2 witnesses and you said, say we're outside the room and are testifying to the fact that, they're having sex for the purpose of marriage. Now, hopefully she already went to mikveh before that, right? So she went to mikveh, she's now pure and so forth. There's witnesses there, then and they're having sex for the purpose of kiddushin. Again, theoretically possible. It's one of those things that's, we don't actually do generally, but it's one of those things that people play with, like, oh, well, we don't want to get married, we don't want to do the whole marriage thing, maybe we'll just do that. But the Talmud tries to make it basically get rid of it. Yeah. Right. Rabbi Dinan notes to me that you don't need someone to check. You just need to make sure there are no chatzitzot. You need to make sure there's nothing separating. So anyone can serve that purpose of making sure, that nails, hair, and so forth,
Right.
anyone can theoretically serve that role.
I have heard of widows who, and also of women who have gone through menopause, who just have been in the custom of going every month to the mikveh and keep on doing it. Is that a problem?
No,
I don't think so.
Yeah, I've heard of that as well, that it's something that, people, but it feels renewing. It feels...
But that's one of the beautiful ways that this becomes a pattern that is positive in a marriage, right? There are ways, Rabbi Pernick, I think, mentioned this before, there are ways in which Taharat HaMishpacha can become a burden, whether it's because the type of counting leads to what's called halachic infertility, or because of, just like the burden that a woman might feel from a man to have to keep nida, whatever it is, it could lead to burden. But if a woman going through menopause and post, a time of being able to have children, still feels this connection to the cycle of Taharat HaMishpacha and going to the mikvah. And it's a beautiful thing to do. I'm not sure how the counting happens, and I don't know how she would calculate when to go.
Well, yeah, I was going to comment on that because there's this whole idea in sort of one of the extensions of Nida that drives people crazy. It is like a really complex area of law, which is called vestot, which is the veset is the basically the amount of the length of your cycle every month, and so even so if typically a cycle for a woman is like 28 days, then on the 28th day, even if she hasn't had her period yet, they shouldn't have sex because likely she's going to have her period that day because that's how long the cycle typically lasts, right? And it's a whole thing about whatever. It's a very large area of law that, like, I think at YU they spend like 3 months learning Vestos. Like, it's like crazy. At YCT we spent like a week. but anyway,
and it's simpler, we just haven't even talked about it. Yeah. Rabbi Dinin wrote, a postmenopausal woman need go only once and she's tahara for the rest of her life, which is like the opposite of how I'm feeling currently.
Right. But I'm thinking, especially when it comes to that idea of like the vestot of like being aware of like, typically I go to mikveh every 28 days. Like I'm very aware of how often I go. I can imagine a woman saying, you know what, I'm going to continue to go once every 28 days because that's just kind of the routine we've gotten into over the last 25 years or whatever. And continuing to find meaning in that even without the biological feature attached,
Biological feature.
Well, what was the word you said? Biological clock. Right? Even without the biological clock, you can still set
biological feature that is going down in history. Any other thoughts, questions, comments?
What about
Jeff?
What about a pregnant woman? I mean, she could still be having sex at least early on in the pregnancy, but no periods.
And she doesn't have to go to the mikvah. Also, while she's nursing women also don't have to go to the mikvah. So yeah, you're right. There's sort of there's a break where there's sort of all of these very set time. And I've seen people talk about but I've seen people post things about how like for years I've been either nursing or pregnant, and people have go through this of like people who have a lot of kids and in close proximity, and they're sort of, actually I haven't had to worry about mikvah for a long time because I've either been nursing or pregnant continually, or sometimes both. And so sometimes it can be years between people actually going to mikvah, and it's not because of anything they did wrong. It's just because they're either nursing or pregnant.
I had another question, not on the mikvah so much, but what do men do? It seems that women have to do everything. Women are responsible for everything. They're responsible for not getting men aroused. They're responsible for cleansing. In the men, especially the guys who just study all day.
Yeah.
The real Haredi, the guys who maybe don't even work for a living because they may be yeshiva teachers sometime, but they don't. They just read. It just doesn't seem fair.
Yeah.
This is all you, Josh.
Okay, I'm going to first respond. Rabbi Dinin noted, and I should have mentioned, after birth, a woman has to go to mikvah because of natural bleeding associated with
after she gives birth.
after she gives birth, right? So it's not like a forever break. It's there, there is a period of time after birth that
which speaks to what you were talking about before in terms of a man being present and being part of
right. So there is that, so that was separate, but an important point that there is mikveh attendance, even after childbirth, but not while pregnant. Okay, so
you answer Jeff's question, I'll answer the chat question.
Okay, well, I'm getting all kinds of. I'm getting the cheat sheet from my brother-in-law, which is always,
No, give your answer.
No, I mean, men do have responsibilities to not put themselves in situations in which, right? It's not the same, right? Women have to go to mikveh and have to do bedikas and like all this checks of like there's all this stuff that falls very squarely on the hands of the women that the men don't have in a comparable way. And you're right that it's sort of an inequality there. Men do have responsibilities to, say, not get aroused and not spill seed outside of the context of trying for pregnancy, things like that. But there's no equivalent to something like nida, which is really a huge part of a woman's life for women who keep Taharat Mishpacha. Like it's a very significant part of their life. And the men, again, other than, say, not sleeping in the same bed with them and things like that, maybe sleeping on the couch or whatever, or just separating the bed. Most people just have two twin beds pushed together and then spread apart, is what most people do. But
I think sleeping on the couch is for different times.
Right. Some people do that, but yeah. So men are supposed to be tsanua, be modest, and are supposed, right? There's like some level, but there aren't those same kind of like, let's say, I don't know, restrictions isn't the right word, but there's so much of Jewish law that relates specifically to women's bodies, and there's not a parallel when it comes to men's bodies. There are like specific laws, but not whole, areas of law in the same way. So there is definitely that lack of parallel there, for sure.
I will just great question. I will just add to Rabbi Pernick's answer, which actually was a very nice answer. I think that part of, at least in the world where this is done well, right, where the man might have less, I'll just keep using his language, men might have less restrictions or boundaries to uphold, but are still part of this partnership, that I think that it's the man's job to be supportive, and it's the man's job to help with the learning and the understanding and the commitment to what this looks like for their family. It's clearly not the same. You can't level those two things out on the same balance. But I think that, again, in the partnerships that I've seen where this is done well and with a sense of partnership and with a sense of understanding one of the other, the woman might take on those things, but it is the man who is behind her who is helping her figure out how and why is this meaningful, and what does this look like for the way that we're raising our children, and why is this important to us. And one of my favorite things that a man has ever said on this topic is, we keep Taharat Mishpacha until my wife tells me that we're not going to, right? That it is something that, and this is in a community where that wouldn't be such a crazy thing, that the woman isn't in her mind, in his mind, obligated to do so, but that the man is the one who allows for this to happen in such a way that there is kedusha, there is holiness around it. And I hope that that's always the case, that it's not being seen as kind of the woman's job to uphold, and the man just sits back and watches it all happen, as a nod to our men on the screen. Rebecca
Does that, wait, the Friedman's
yeah, no, I know, but Norm also asked a question.
Oh.
But I'm happy to answer it. Can we talk about why Hodaya felt she needed to leave and why she decided not to marry him? Yeah, I think that you'll see more of this in the upcoming episodes. I think that she decides to leave. Oh, Rachel asked the question. Sorry. I think that hi, Rachel. I think that she decides to leave because she feels uncomfortable. I think she has grown up in a world in which sex before marriage is not something that she ever thought she would be doing. And I think that she recognizes in a moment that feels, I guess, heated to her, though we don't actually really see what's going on, that she needs to leave the situation and not be intimate with him, even if she has gone to mikveh. Now, some would argue, well, she's already been intimate with him because she's been kissing him. Fine, sure, but they haven't had intercourse. And I think that that's kind of the point at which she felt like she had to separate herself. I think that she decides not to marry him because I think that there is an element of, and this was another topic that I thought that maybe we would discuss today, but we won't just get into it in depth. I think there is conversation specifically between people who are either from or Baal Tshuva, right, have become from, and people who are not knowing kind of how to come to a common ground. And she does say that he says, I want to learn. I want to be part of this. I want to figure this out. And she says that she knows, but clearly it's a hardship for her. It's hard for her to have to tell him which spoon to use and all of those kinds of things. And she feels that it might be a burden to bring him into a life that she is herself kind of struggling with and unsure about. So again, you're going to find out more as the episodes go on. But that's my takeaway from just this episode. Rebecca or Leonard?
Yeah, I was wondering about men in the mikveh. I know there are some groups where the men will go to the mikveh before Shabbat. I just wondered, I mean, obviously it's not required, but what's that all about?
Oh, yes. Rabbi Pernick, feel free.
Oh, great. So that's really much more of like a Hasidic idea. I mean, at least today, about sort of purity. Look, I mean, we talk about purity and tahara, and there's an idea that, like, well, just if women are going to mikveh to become pure, shouldn't men be, if they're going to be praying, they're going to be communing with God and so forth, shouldn't they be pure as well, right? So Rabbi Schatz knows men used to go to mikveh every morning. Some men still do go to mikveh every morning. And one of my rabbis in
It's not mandatory any longer.
It's not mandatory, but one of my rabbis in yeshiva who grew up Satmar talked about how the previous Satmar Rebbe was like really, really OCD about taharat haguf, about like cleanliness of the body, and he would spend hours every morning cleaning before going to mikveh, and like wouldn't daven shachar until like 11:45 because he had spent so long like making sure every possible crevice in his body was clean before he went to mikveh and so forth. The restrictions on men's mikvahs are not the same as women's mikvahs. So, for example, you can use a pool that's a certain volume of water as a men's mikvah, but not as, a women's mikvah has to be living water. It needs to be, a certain amount of collected rainwater, and that, that's the way most mikvahs are built, is that they collect 40 seah of rainwater, and then that water, it's called nishika, it sort of touches tap water, and it sort of transforms it all into mikveh water, or it's a living body of water like an ocean. For men, there's a lot more room for leniency. So, example, using pools or other sort of non-natural bodies of water, especially in places where it's hard, where there's not like a designated men's mikveh. But in certain places, men do go every day. But it's as opposed to women, where we're saying it's a requirement, and the prohibition of sleeping with a woman who's in a state of nida is karet, a spiritual excision. There's no equivalent for men. For men, there's a desire. You want to be tahor. Back in the day, if you wanted to go to the temple, for sure you had to go into the mikveh. Nowadays, we're sort of all in a state of sort of tuma. We're all kind of impure anyway. So people who want to elevate, in the same way, the first thing we do in the morning is we wash our hands and say al netilat yadayim, sort of purify our hands. Some people sort of extend that and say, I want to be pure before starting my day. But it's not a requirement in that same way, and there's no punishment for not being tahor for men in the way that for women or for men who sleep with women who aren't. So there is like, a prohibition that's being, okay. Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Yeah, I don't really have any we can talk about toilet paper. I don't really have any final things to say on this other than, I think it's a tricky, Jeff, do you have something to say?
Oh, I just had something, when, who's it, Avi, he used the wrong spoon.
Yes.
I remember my father was in the delicatessen business, but when he came home, he had no idea. My mother kept the milkshakes and flakes silverware in different drawers. My father had no idea. And when he was in the kitchen, it was a disaster in terms of anything in the household. And it just made me laugh.
Right.
To think that it reminded me of my father. He didn't know I have any idea about the milkshakes and flakes.
It's the famous story. The famous story of Rav Soloveitchik is, sort of the father of modern Orthodoxy, that his wife for a period of time was just like in the hospital or something, and he, so he was taking over the kitchen, and when she came home, she was like, "What are you doing? You changed up the whole kitchen." He was like, "What are you talking about? I'm doing things exactly as it says in the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law." And she responded and said, "You and your Shulchan Aruch are chafing out my kitchen." So there's a difference between the theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge, right? So yeah, that's,
Rabbi Elliot Dorff, who many people on this call know personally or know of, when he talks about Pesach, and typically he's the person at Ziegler, the seminary that I went to, who talks about how to kasher for Pesach and shop for Pesach and all the rest of it. And the first thing he says is, really, I should not be teaching the class. It should be Marlon, who is his wife and who is the person who is kind of in control of the kitchen and where things are. And he said, there have been many times I've walked into my own kitchen as a rabbi and a learned halachic man, and I do something wrong because it's her kitchen and I don't know what I'm doing in it. Yeah, it is. We'll get to kashrut at some point. There will be many more instances of messing up the kashrut system in people's kitchens. Okay, Rebecca, last one.
Oh, I was just going to say.
Yeah, you did.
No, she's not. She's good.
Okay. Never mind.
In the show, the thing about the laundry and doing laundry, hanging laundry, I actually was recognizing a tie to the whole mikveh storyline, because for the single people like Yifat and Nati, maybe that was their ritual, the whole doing laundry, and you saw Nati, it was hanging up in his apartment, and then the whole thing with the laundry line and being in control, and Yifat had taken the washing machine with her, and maybe that was part of their cleansing and their ritual before Shabbat, and because they're single, they're not going to be going to mikveh. But I thought that they purposely put that whole laundry thing in the same episode as the mikveh.
I like that.
It's a very beautiful drash. That's a really nice drash.
Yeah. You saying that reminded me of, when I watched part of Srugim when I was in Ulpan, and that was the homework every night. My Ulpan teacher forbade me from using the dryer because she said, I had a dryer in my apartment, but she's like, you're in Israel. It's summer. Like, you're going to be using the dryer. Just put, I never used a clothesline before, and she forbade me from using the dryer. She's like, you have to put it out on the clothesline. So anyway, that's my Srugim and clothesline connection. But yours is more beautiful.
So I hope that you look at these sources. I sent 3 articles, one of which Rabbi Dorff is actually quoted in, and the podcast and the source sheet that Rabbi Pernick put out. I'll just say this, and then Rabbi Pernick, you can close for us if you would like. One of the articles that I sent you that Rabbi Dorff is quoted in talks about how to sanctify relationships in or out of marriage, and how the idea of Taharat HaMishpacha is supposed to bring some of that sanctification to a partnership, but because it's only in partnership, we often don't think about how people who are dating need to also figure out boundaries for their own holy relationships, and what does it look like to be in a holy relationship. And Martin Buber, as we all know, I and thou and all of that, and how to really consider people for who they are, and not just think about them as just a human, but also a soul. And so I hope that this is a conversation that you'll think a little bit about what goes into those relationships, and nida, no nida, women going to mikveh before marriage, not going to mikveh before marriage, premarital sex, no premarital sex, whatever it is. But allowing for all of our relationships to be ones that have boundaries that contain then within them holiness and sanctification of some kind, because I really think that is the power that we get when we are in a marriage that Taharat HaMishpacha brings in, and that I hope in these kinds of forward-moving conversations that we can also bring into the way in which we date and the way in which we are in relationship even before there is a ring on anybody's finger. So that is my last piece.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.